Hello, Pastor Kevin here, and one of the things I want to talk about today is the First Nations version of Holy Scripture, the indigenous translation of the New Testament that I used for the gospel reading during the summer as just a way of thinking about the Scripture differently, as well as getting a different sound in people's ears and then having a different kind of interpretation. But let's talk about this paraphrase of the New Testament. Okay, first of all, I'm really glad this exists. I really like the project. I really like the idea of it. I really like much of the execution. But there's some areas of it that I find a little challenging, at least for me. And a couple of the challenges are, first of all, they both revolve around language. I really appreciated at first the way that language unfolds, has that First Nations sound to the ears, has the cadences and the structures and all that sort of stuff within the sentences and the language itself. However, I found it kind of went into almost a caricature of what we think First Nations English sounds like versus how people actually talk from that community. Example, I'm going to read from Luke chapter 10, the story of Mary and Martha, and see if you can find where the bias is. Okay. As they journeyed on, they went to a village where a woman named Head Woman, or Martha, gave them lodging at her house. Her sister Healing Tears, or Mary, who lived with her, sat next to Creator Sets Free, or Jesus, on the floor, listening to his teaching. As their wisdom keeper, Creator Sets Free, Jesus would teach the men who gathered around him, but this would not have been proper for a woman of that culture. That was in parentheses. Head Woman, or Martha, was distracted, trying to get the meal ready for their honored guests. When she saw Healing Tears, or Mary, sitting down, she walked up to Creator Sets Free, or Jesus, and said, "Wisdom keeper, do you not care that my sister has left me to work alone? Tell her to help me." Head Woman, or Martha, he said, "O Head Woman, I know many things worry and trouble you, but you must set your heart on the one thing that matters. That is what Healing Tears, Mary, has done, and I will not take it from her." The other issue, First Nations version, is the paraphrase. InterVarsity Press, it's for kind of an evangelical publishing house that immediately for me put up, well, I don't want to call it a red flag, but something to be aware of. And so I found a conservative bias within the paraphrase. And a paraphrase is also always a simultaneous translation. Could you see where the interpretation sets in? In fact, it was right there in the beginning, in the middle. As their wisdom keeper, Creator Sets Free, Jesus would teach the men who gathered around him, but this would not have been proper for a woman of that culture. That is true. That's not totally where my problem is. My problem is in the next piece. Head Woman, or Martha, was distracted. Is that what was happening here? So what I think this does is sit in a very conservative type interpretation and framework. Was Martha distracted, or was she living out a role, or what was she doing there? Was she right to be angry with her sister? Maybe, maybe not. There's more layers to this story than what this paraphrase suggests. And I think the paraphrase, when it says things like she was distracted, shuts down any other conversation or interpretation of that passage. But what I found, what I liked about it was when I was reading it to myself silently, I found the language works a lot better than if you are reading it aloud. In fact, some folks in the congregation said that they found it a little clunky to listen to, mainly because there's so much stops and starts around names and that sort of thing. It doesn't have that flow of language that is as pleasing to the ear as other translations, other paraphrases, other ways of looking at or reading or hearing from Scripture. But on the whole, again, I'm glad it exists. It is a useful tool to come back to in maybe Bible study or other ways of engaging with Scripture and the grand narrative of our faith. So yeah, I give it 3.5 stars out of 5 if I were to be rating it, but for what that's worth, it is well worth having as part of the Bible study, sermon study toolbox.